Hi everyone, here's what's bothering me today. There was a lot of terrible stuff that happened this week that I didn't really have a chance to cover and touch on. So once again, welcome to the Sunday Sum Up, where we're going to delve into all of the terrible things that many of us, including the media, missed this week. So first up on this list, which is a story that should really concern everyone, especially the so-called freedom-loving crowd, but the Florida GOP wants to tackle cancel culture by secretly recording professors. This article from goodwordnews.com says that Florida Republicans have passed a controversial bill that claims to protect ideological freedom at state colleges and universities. Bill 233, which now heads to Governor Ron DeSantis for consideration, would require schools to survey the personal political opinions of faculty and students on their campuses and produce an annual report analyzing in which measures competing ideas and perspectives are presented. In addition, the law would allow students to secretly register professors for the purpose of denouncing them if they felt the right to free speech was being violated. Which, if that sounds dystopian as fuck, that's because it is. This is so ridiculous. That, all these conservatives love to talk about, oh, this is censorship 1984. I would love to see you start hounding Governor DeSantis about how absolutely ridiculous and dystopian and just improper and anti-freedom this proposed legislation would be. This next story comes from BC, beautiful British Columbia on the west coast of Canada. Here's the problem. It came to light from Global News earlier in the week that the government of BC is focusing on vaccinating the famous Whistler Resort area in anticipation for the upcoming tourist season, which, like, on the one hand, yay, they're vaccinating people and they're trying to get tourists, but that means that you still haven't closed the border, and people on their way to Whistler are going to stop in other areas and interact with people who aren't vaccinated. Do you see the problems here? Do you see how this is not actually going to work the way you think it is? Oh my God. Now, granted, another part of why they're vaccinating Whistler is because it was the center of a COVID outbreak. So they want to vaccinate people there to prevent it from being another outbreak and then even more people spreading it from there. But even just getting into Whistler, people are going to cross either by land across the roads there that connect the lower mainland to Washington state. They're going to come from potentially other parts of Canada by land or by plane, meaning they're going to be in Vancouver's airport. People will come by ferry because there's a few ferries that connect them to the Tsawwassen port. There's so many different ways and vectors for potential disease transmission, but they're not talking about vaccinating all those people and actually just shutting things down until we get mass vaccination underway, and then we can start opening. It is just missing the forest for the trees, Next, we got another double whammy about the increasing police state and surveillance state, which should scare a lot more people, but there's... So this person named Bill Emery has this really great online Twitter thread. So I'll just provide a link to it down below. But basically what they're saying is that some parts of the city and neighborhoods of the Minneapolis area have basically been put under a form of military-style occupation. There's law enforcement officers widely violating people's rights, and when people cry for reform, they can't really accomplish it because of the nature of how the municipal politics are organized. Journalists and reporters are being rounded up, cataloged, arrested, and driven away from protests to prevent them from documenting illegal actions by law enforcement. There is so much terrifying police state and police brutality that is happening in Minneapolis or the Minneapolis area right now that is being underreported on because they are preventing reporters from getting to the scene. That is the stuff we hear about happening in third world countries that, we used to have that make us feel superior, and now it's happening in our own backyards. And then that brings us to another person on Twitter named Liz Sawyer, who had this video showing that media had been ushered to a checkpoint where State Patrol was taking pictures of every journalist's credentials and their faces. Basically adding it to a database of journalists who are not on their side. It is this I'm hoping that people are realizing between the Florida story and these past two stories that this is a dystopian nightmare. But unfortunately, it's really hard to challenge this because a lot of how law enforcement is chosen and how their powers are delegated is not within the realm of public control, and that's a problem. So we need to figure out ways of fixing that and challenging that, which I think is part of why you've seen so much pushback against that and the formation around the whole thin blue line and blue lives matter and all that nonsense. But this is some very distressing, dangerous stuff. For all the people, especially on the right, who love to crow about 1984 and the police state and Big Brother is watching you, it's right here. And to all those people who think that because Americans elected Joe Biden, that things would suddenly get better, but they really haven't. Maybe that then begs the question about why we continue to vote for these parties and these candidates, if really the baseline never actually improves or changes for the better. The continuation of the police state under Biden and the massive ramping up of an already bloated defense budget should concern every person who voted Democrat. There are serious problems happening here and in your own backyard right now because the police are afraid of people rising up and denouncing them for their clear and egregious actions. It's absolutely ridiculous and so frustrating. Next, we unfortunately have another lovely piece of dystopia. A source revealed in this NBC San Diego article that there were leaked documents that showed the US government tracking journalists and immigration advocates through a secret database. So if you are a journalist or an immigration advocate, or probably just any kind of advocate at all, even if you're a climate justice advocate, you're probably on a list somewhere. And really, that's probably not okay, considering the current trend of government and big business becoming increasingly married to the point that they're practically indistinguishable from one another. And that's not going to be helpful for anything such as the labor movement, for the climate justice movement, for the police reform or outright abolition movement. This is some dystopian shit, and it is not being reported or tackled by any of the mainstream media sites or by anyone whose narrative this doesn't fit, because those media sites are controlled by businesses who have a vested interest in seeing this dystopia come to fruition. It's that simple. How do you fight back against something this massive? Honestly, that's a subject for another video. Lots of long form videos that I'm slowly but surely working on. I just don't have time in the day. But this just shows that the US government, whether it's Democrat or Republican, does not have your best interests at heart if your interests are to see a betterment of America and its treatment of people within and outside of its borders. And then finally today, the final just depressing cherry on top for all of this is this Wall Street Journal article about Syrians being stripped of refugee protection in Denmark. Denmark, which has some of the West's toughest immigration policies, is now saying that parts of Syria are safe to return to, and they are revoking the refugee status of certain Syrian families. Just listen to how this article starts. When Rawan Bertawi, a 22-year-old Syrian refugee living in Denmark, reported for her shift at a cosmetic company's warehouse one day in mid-December, she found her keycard didn't work. She sensed something was wrong. Her flustered manager summoned her into his office and showed her an email he had just received from the Danish Immigration Service. Her refugee status, along with her right to work, had been revoked, and she would have to leave the country. Imagine fleeing war and crimes and famine and finally securing a place of peace and quiet where you can try and get your life back together and you're clearly contributing to society. And that society, all of a sudden, with no rhyme or reason or warning, cancels that on you and says you have to go back to hell. Here's another problem with this, though, as the article points out. Since Denmark cut off formal diplomatic relations with Syria near the start of the civil war a decade ago, it is unable to technically deport Syrians. So what is it doing? Instead, it is placing those who no longer have legal status in removal camps, a policy that aid groups say is aimed at pressuring Syrians to voluntarily return to Syria of their own accord, since the government cannot legally deport them. If this sounds a lot like the kids in cages, you're right, except it's not kids in cages, it's in camps, and trying to pressure them and their families, whose status they have voluntarily revoked, into pressuring them back into a hellish situation which they rightfully decided to flee. Imagine, for my fellow Canadians here, if things went wrong and you fled to America because, well, we have, some friends or some relatives there, and you were stopped at the border and you were separated from your loved ones and you didn't know where they went and you were not given adequate protection from the elements or anything like that. That'd be pretty horrifying, right? Especially from a brother nation. Imagine also if you managed to escape to a nation like America or lovely progressive socialist Denmark and find, okay, geez, we escaped. I'm here. I have my card. I can work. Oh, things are finally getting back to normal. And then they say, nope, sorry, it's been revoked. You got to go back. Imagine how that would make you feel and how you would have to deal with that and how crushing that would be. And I think really that's the overall theme from all these terrifying dystopian stories. It's this crushing weight and pressure of the dystopia and refusing to take care of our own and refusing to do the right thing. I'm not Christian, but a lot of what motivates me and this channel is to be outraged at injustice where I see it and to champion the right causes because it feels like the right thing to do. Justice needs to be served, whether it is for racial minorities, for the climate, for workers in society, for the LGBTQ community. Justice needs to be served. And with all of humanity, with its supposed creativity, and with all this money and economic activity, and all this overproduction of food and housing and money, you're telling me we can't take care of people. You're telling me we can't roll back on this dystopian nightmare we increasingly allow to just happen with no significant pushback. Because we're afraid that if we make waves, that's how our job goes. And we need our job in a capitalist system to survive or at least endure the capitalist nightmare. It's what keeps people down. It's what keeps wages low. It is all part and parcel of the horrors of the modern world that continue to go unchallenged because we like the convenience. We like the convenience of Amazon and takeaway orders and getting everything we need online and the ease of commodification of everything. And with the touch of a button, you can get whatever you want. Food, a relationship, whatever you want, capitalism can provide. And so because we've gotten used to this society and culture and getting, our produce from the global south in the middle of winter when that should not make normal, natural sense, we are scared of any possible alternative or any turning back of these hard-fought gains of prosperity that we come to believe we enjoy. But it's coming at the price of our freedom, and not just our freedom in our nations, but the freedom of our fellows in other parts of the West and around the world as the planet continues to change, and not in the best way. The planet continues to change in the most grotesque and dystopian ways when it doesn't have to. When is enough going to be enough for people to finally rise up and say, stop, I'm not tolerating this anymore from either of the two main ruling class parties? All of these stories that I shared today should absolutely disgust, horrify, and enrage all people who believe in things like freedom and prosperity and justice. And yet, unfortunately, there's a lot of people who would think that these are just the normal prices we pay, or that, no, see, we should get rid of Syrians. People will find so many justifications for the unjustifiable. And because of that, this terrible timeline is going to continue. And that's what's bothering me today.